Hello students, this is the video that I'm making for JMS 200, the lecture about media law. I figured this would be a good place to stand, right? In front of the San Diego Superior Court building. There it is over there, over here on Claremont Mesa. And as I'm doing this, I'm thinking, you know what, I'm pretty close to Convoy Street, where all these yummy Asian restaurants are. I bet I could get some Korean fried chicken on Convoy Street. The law books behind me are not real. And we're off. Here's a headline here. This is also discussed in the Mindich textbook. Alex Jones hosted a show called InfoWars. I'm assuming some of y'all are familiar with him. Mindich uses this particular example to talk about the limits of the First Amendment. And while we do have the First Amendment and freedom of expression in the United States, that does not mean you are free from punishment and that there can be no repercussions for what you say. This is a very disturbing story. I apologize, but it is part of the textbook. There was a number of, I don't even remember how many, but it was like this horrific school shooting. We call it Sandy Hook school shooting. Alex Jones goes on, shows online and basically says, this is a hoax and that the parents are crisis actors and that the whole thing has just been fabricated to try and come up with an excuse to put in more rigid gun control laws. Well, the parents of the murdered children, I can't even imagine how horrific that would be. The parents of the murdered children sue and are able to recover, or at least they got a huge judgment. I think it was over $1 billion that Alex Jones was forced to pay. As of this recording, I don't know if he has paid. I mean, the guy's pretty devious and has been shifting money around and claiming bankruptcy. But Mindich uses this example to illustrate that while we do have the First Amendment, that does not mean you are free from punishment. Okay, here we go. First Amendment was added to the U.S. Constitution in 1791 as part of the Bill of Rights. It's not actually part of the original Constitution, but my understanding, if I'm remembering correctly from when I had, high school civics class, was that not everyone was on board with the Constitution, founding fathers, early colonies, etc., or early states, I guess, but they agreed to it and said, we'll agree to the Constitution if we very quickly add these Bill of Rights and some amendments to it. That's why the First Amendment was the first one that was added to the Constitution. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. Okay, that's the relevant point I want to talk about here. Freedom of speech or freedom of the press. And note that the amendment doesn't say you could have some law or maybe when it's justified. It's pretty absolute. Congress shall make no law. That is quite direct, quite absolute. However, over the years, Congress has added many laws that kind of limit what you can say and what you can and can't say. And press over the years has become to be interpreted as any kind of media dissemination of a message, not just on paper, which is what it was when the United States was first formed in the 1700s, but even social media and the internet and radio and television is all assumed to be a form of the press. What I want to stress here is that, and this is very important, many students don't know this, the First Amendment only applies to the government. I repeat, it only applies to the government, the federal government, the state government, local governments, okay? So that means if you are a private company, or let's say a private company that owns a theme park like Disney, someone wants to wear a t-shirt that says, an image of Mickey Mouse doing some vulgar thing to Minnie Mouse, okay? Disney could say, no, we don't want you wearing that t-shirt. You, as a park goer, can't scream, First Amendment, my First Amendment. No, Disney is a private company. If they want to limit your freedom of expression for not wearing a vulgar t-shirt into the park, they can do that. They are allowed to do that. Okay. When the court is looking at cases that relate to freedom of expression, there are some basic questions. Does the speech or the expression serve the public good in some way? Is there information that the public needs to know in order to make some informed decision about government, or does the speech harm the public in some way? Here's this nice graphic. I grabbed this from the textbook. It talks about, I think this graphic is in relation to an adult club, nightclub, place where people, strippers, adult dancers, whatever, exotic entertainment, whatever you want to call it, where that was going on. Um, there's really little public benefit from that. It's not serving the public good in any way. So the Candyland case, the courts decided that it was okay for laws to insist that, you know, women not be totally naked, have some very, very modest covering like pasties over certain body parts. That's okay. It does seem as if laws limiting adult dancing and naked dancing, it does seem as if that's limiting someone's freedom of expression. But the court said, you know, it's really not helping the public in any way by allowing this stuff to go on. However, you have something like the Watergate investigation, where wrongdoing by government officials, including the president of the United States, was brought to light. And in that case, even though maybe some rules were broken and there were some laws that maybe were sort of danced around, the public had a right to know that, and the public needs to know that. So there's some compelling reason to allow that. So these are kind of the spectrum that courts look at when they are deciding whether or not a rule or regulation about speech actually violates the First Amendment or not. 1964, Times v. Sullivan. You should know this case. Okay, that's not a hint. That's a flat out direct order from your professor. It's not a hint. You should know this case, Times v. Sullivan. It came about because of an ad that was placed in the New York Times in 1960. The purpose of the ad was to solicit legal funds for Martin Luther King Jr. It described the arrests of some civil rights protesters in Alabama. A public official by the name Sullivan felt that some of the information in that's printed in the ad was not true, and he felt like it defamed his reputation. Defamation is when you hurt someone's reputation. So this guy Sullivan sues for libel, saying that this ad has defamed his reputation. Well, the ruling of the case established something, that the ruling about actual malice. What this means is that if you are a public figure, like a politician, okay, if you are a public figure, it's okay for the press to write negative things about you because we want to encourage free, robust discussion. And we want the press to act like a watchdog and help keep politicians in check. So it's okay if reporters and journalists sometimes make mistakes. If you are a public figure, you have to prove something called actual malice, which is a very, very difficult standard to meet. What it means is that you need to prove that the journalist, in this case, the New York Times, people who work for the New York Times, not only did the stuff that they say was not true, but they knowingly said it. They knew the information was not true and they went ahead and published it anyway. That's a very, very difficult standard to meet. And it makes public figures more susceptible to sort of negative articles written about them. But I understand the general sense of that. I understand the general sense of that. Hustler Magazine versus Falwell. Okay. If you are not familiar with what Hustler Magazine used to be, I don't even know if it still exists. I honestly don't know. But there are different types, or there were different types of adult publications when I was growing up. And, you know, some of them were a little soft core, maybe a little artistic. Hustler is on the extreme. Okay, just take my word for it. Hustler is on the extreme, very raunchy. Hustler printed an ad making fun of Jerry Falwell, who was a very, very famous televangelist, the kind of person who goes on TV and asks for money and he's going to pray to God, you know, super, super holy, but you need to send him your money. Well, Larry Flint, the publisher of Hustler, didn't like this kind of thing, thought the guy was being a hypocrite. So Campari, a type of liquor, had a series of ads called My First Time, was about the first time you had Campari. They do this spoof of the ad about the first time Jerry Falwell is having sexual relations, and it's with his mother. Okay, that's, and in very, very small print, very, very small print, it said, you know, this is a spoof, this is a parody, not to be taken seriously. Well, the courts, Falwell sues for libel, saying that this ad has defamed his reputation. The courts basically found that, there really wasn't any malice going on here. It was maybe a joke done in poor taste and maybe raunchy, but it was clearly meant to be a spoof. And I think initially there was some sort of payment for emotional distress that the ad called emotional distress to Falwell. And then even later, at some point, that was reduced. So as offensive and raunchy and maybe in bad taste as this ad was, this is okay. And Falwell was not able to sue Hustler magazine for libel. Okay, now this still kind of like rubs me the wrong way. Westboro Baptist Church is a group of super devout religious people, so they claim, and they protest. They're not happy with the United States, saying that the United States is too lenient when it comes to same-sex relationships and marijuana, and the soldiers who die in maybe an overseas conflict deserve to die because they're fighting for an evil country, and it's okay to mock them. So they go in 2006 to the funeral for a gentleman who was killed in Iraq, Corporal Snyder. And this, I mean, if you're a parent, this has to be so sad, right? You're at the funeral for your child. However they died, it's just super sad. And then you look across the street and there's people mocking you with signs that say, and again, these are the signs, I'm not saying this, not my words, Westboro Baptist Church words, thank God for dead soldiers. The father sues, was awarded $5 million for emotional distress, but the courts did upheld and said, yes, Westboro Baptist Church does have a right to protest. The damages have to do with emotional distress, not the actions that they actually did.
They're shocking.
God showed his wrath to thee.
They're cruel and outrageous, and for most Americans, simply beyond the pale.
Thank God for dead soldiers.
But should they be against the law? What the members of the tiny Westboro Baptist Church in Topeka, Kansas do at the funerals of fallen soldiers and Marines seems to have violated an almost universal sense of basic human decency. And they know it, and they're proud of it.
Well, you seem to have crossed the line for just about everyone.
You know what? How good that is for you to say that?
That's good.
Yes, because this nation has crossed every line of God's standards.
The textbook talks about some limits of free speech, okay? I've already established that the government is not supposed to or should not be doing laws limiting free speech. However, there are limits. There are many limits, okay? In Schenck v. United States, this is an old ruling, more than 100 years ago now. Schenck was distributing some leaflets resisting the war draft. This is during World War I. He was arrested, and the precedent that was established there was clear and present danger. If your words or expressions caused clear and present danger, you could be arrested, locked up, penalized in some way. Decades later, the courts changed, and now we have something called the imminent lawless action test. Imminent lawless action. Brandenburg was a KKK leader, a Klansman. Yes, okay, that's what he was. Was talking about doing a march on Washington, saying some really, really horrible things about certain groups of people in the United States. But the court said that, he maybe was saying horrible, hateful things, talking about getting rid of people, like get them out of the United States. He wasn't targeting specific individuals, and it wasn't saying, let's do this immediately. That the standard now is your words have to advocate immediate violence. Just saying, I hate all these type of people, insert whatever ethnic group you want. I hate all of these people. That's actually okay. That is actually not illegal to say that. It's the imminent lawless action test. The Pentagon Papers case, this is discussed in the textbook. What's the page number? Page 306. Page 306. In the early 70s, there were some documents about the Vietnam War. They became known casually as the Pentagon Papers. They're linked to the New York Times and the Washington Post. The information in the Pentagon Papers was really, really damaging to the United States government in terms of its public image. It revealed that the US government had been lying to citizens for a long time, many, many years, lying about the reasons we were involved in Vietnam, the causes of Vietnam, how well the war was going. The Nixon administration tries to stop publication. And do take a look at these paragraphs in the textbook. The courts ruled that it was okay to print that information. A 6-3 decision. Okay, New York Times v. United States. That's the name of the decision. There's a movie called The Post. Came out in 2017. Meryl Streep, Tom Hanks. That movie centers on the Washington Post, which also published the information, although I think actually the New York Times was probably more central to the case. But anyway, the movie The Post, that's what it's about. And the two newspapers you should remember are Washington Post and New York Times. At state levels, district courts, all these different kind of courts, it basically depends. It depends on which state you're in and what the judge is going to decide. On the one hand, you could say that it's good to allow cameras in the courtroom because we're a free country. Why shouldn't we see what's going on? If you've been arrested for something and if the police have valid evidence, what are they afraid of? Why are the police and the prosecutors afraid of everyone knowing what they see, of seeing everything? But then you could also say, well, it taints the whole situation because now the people in the court, the lawyers, the witnesses, et cetera, they're not really playing for the people who are making the decision, the judge and the jurors. They're going to be playing for the publicity and the fame out there. And then if, God forbid, there's a mistrial and then you have to try people again, well, now everyone who's seen the TV coverage has gotten this false information in their mind. So I think there are valid reasons for keeping cameras out, and I think there could be a valid argument for bringing them in. The equal time rule, now this relates to the government wanting to make sure we have free and fair elections and that the media doesn't unfairly bias people. Here's basically, I'll just boil it down into, kind of a most simplified way I can. If a candidate comes, say a conservative politician, and buys 30 seconds of airtime on KFMB, that's a CBS affiliate here in San Diego. Conservative buys 30 seconds of airtime on KFMB, they're going to charge $1,000, whatever it is, $2,000. If now the liberal or the Socialist Party or the Green Party or some other party candidate comes and says, hey, I want to buy time on your station, KFMB can't charge the other candidate more money. You have to sell airtime. If you are selling airtime, you have to sell it to people at the same rate. That's what it means. You cannot give differing rates to people. The equal time rule is different from the fairness doctrine, okay? I guarantee some of y'all are going to confuse these no matter how hard I try to stress the difference. The fairness doctrine is a rule that is no longer in effect. It was in effect for a couple of decades. The basic provision here was that if you were a radio or television station using traditional over-the-air terrestrial broadcasting, okay, not streaming services, not cable services, not social media, not newspapers, radio and television stations that used traditional terrestrial over-the-air broadcasting. This is old school radio TV. If you were talking about a controversial issue, you had to give both sides of the issue, which makes sense. Like, oh, Arsenault, that makes sense. You should give both sides of an issue. Well, conservatives actually were ones that argued against this and helped to sort of get the fairness doctrine removed for a variety of reasons. One of the reasons was it became very difficult to decide what was controversial and what was not controversial. Okay. Cigarettes are bad for you. I have known to puff the tobacco before. Okay. I'm not saying I never smoked a cigarette, but I know it's bad. If, in the 70s and 80s, news stations are coming out saying, Surgeon General report, smoking causes lung cancer. Well, then the big tobacco would say, well, now we want to report saying that tobacco is good for you. It stimulates the throat, smells good, makes your brain work faster, whatever. It sounds absurd, but that literally was one of the arguments, that if you're going to say tobacco is bad, we want a thing that says tobacco is good. And I think there was similar discussion about seatbelts in cars. You can't tell me to wear a seatbelt, right? You can't prove that seatbelt's going to save my life. I want a news segment that says seatbelts are bad for you. So the fairness doctrine no longer exists. Now we have Section 230. This comes from the Communications Decency Act of, what was the year? I have to look. 1996. Okay. Communications Decency Act 1996. These are 26 words that are part of that big ruling. No provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. What does that mean? What that means is if you run a social media forum, or say you're an internet service provider, if you treat everybody the same and you distribute all their messages the same, then you're not responsible for libel. Okay. Say I run a social media platform, I don't know what you'd call it. Let's just call it AX, right? For my last name, AX. If I let anybody publish whatever they want, and then someone says something hateful, a death threat, something like that, I'm not responsible. I can just say, hey, I just provided the sandbox and the forum for people to say this stuff. I'm not responsible for what people say. However, if you run a social media forum or an internet service provider and you go in and you begin to exercise editorial control to say, we're going to allow this, we're not going to allow that, then you are responsible, because now you are exerting editorial control. And in my situation, my fictional social media platform called AX, if I allowed someone to post a death threat, then someone could say, hey, Arts, no, you're responsible. You filter out this other stuff. You allowed that to happen. Section 230 makes it so that you cannot publish, can attack YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, Snapchat, whatever, for something that some private individual or some other person posted. That's basically what it means. Not everyone's happy about it. There's critics on the left, critics on the right who want to get rid of it. Even though Section 230 is the law of the land, at least while I'm doing this recording, the social media companies do have terms of service, and they do have rules, and they do limit some information, specifically when it comes to child pornography, which I agree with. That stuff is verboten. Don't even go there. Don't even get close to that stuff. So there is some stuff that's definitely not allowed. But in general, social media companies are not responsible for the stuff that individual users post on their platforms. And as a way of circling back to the beginning, I am going to repeat a phrase that is in the First Amendment. Now with a question mark. Congress shall make no law. That's what it says. That's what it says. But we have many, many laws. And for those of y'all who are pre-majors in the School of Journalism and Media Studies, or if you are interested in maybe getting into the School of Journalism and Media Studies, come join me. That's where I am. Come join me. You're going to take a class called Media Law and Ethics, JMS 494. This lecture is kind of like a, one lecture overview. The whole semester is about these issues. There's a whole area, about obscenity and indecency. There's a whole area about intellectual property, right? The First Amendment says make no law about limiting freedom of expression. If something is controlled by copyright or comes from someone else, there's a lot of laws about that. So there are a lot of nuances to intellectual property, especially when it comes to the evolving realm of artificial intelligence. National security, this is mentioned in the textbook, but there's a whole, all these issues related to national security. And then we also have issues related to privacy, especially with average people who are not public figures. What can you and not do, right? And then there's also claims made in advertising, right? If you say that, okay, government cannot restrict any kind of freedom of expression, well, anybody selling any product could sell anything, right? Right? I could tell you that this new water is going to make your hair grow. I could say anything. That is blatantly untrue, and we know that that's not allowed. So yes, there are laws, government laws now, about claims made in advertising. So again, if you are a pre-major in the School of JMS, or if you want to join the School of JMS, you will take a class all about law and ethics, and you'll go into detail into all of these subjects. The end. Now I'm going to eat some of that fried chicken.